You won't believe what happened to Jacob at night. He saw something so unbelievable that it changed his life forever. And it all started with a simple rock. Jacob was on a long, lonely journey. He had just left his home in Beersheba, heading far away to the city of Haran. It wasn't just any trip. Jacob had been running away. His brother, Esau, was angry with him, and Jacob had to leave before things got worse. There was a weight on his heart. One night, after traveling all day, Jacob found a quiet place to rest. The sun was setting, and he was tired. He had no soft pillow to sleep on, so he grabbed a nearby stone and laid his head on it. It wasn't comfy at all, but Jacob had no choice. Little did he know, this was the start of something incredible. As he closed his eyes and drifted to sleep, something strange began to happen. Jacob had a dream, but not just any dream. This was something surreal, something scary, and something amazing. In his dream, Jacob saw a huge stairway, stretching all the way from the earth to the sky. Angels were going up and down the steps. It was like a portal between heaven and earth, and Jacob felt a cold chill run down his spine. It was both frightening and incredible. Then the most shocking thing happened. God himself appeared at the top of the stairway. His voice echoed, so clear and strong that it shook Jacob to the core. "I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and Isaac," he said. "I will give you this land where you're lying, and your children will be as many as the dust of the earth. They'll spread out in every direction, and all people on earth will be blessed through them." Jacob's heart was racing. Could this really be true? Would God really be with him? He couldn't believe it. God continued, "I will protect you wherever you go. I will bring you back to this land. I will never leave you until I do everything I've promised." Suddenly, Jacob woke up. His breath was heavy, and he was sweating. His eyes darted around the dark, unfamiliar place. Was it real? Or just a dream? His mind was in a whirlwind, filled with shock, fear, and wonder. "Surely, God is in this place," he whispered, looking around in disbelief. "How could I not know it?" Jacob's heart was full of emotions. Fear, he had never felt so small. Happiness, because the God of his fathers had spoken to him. And even a little shame, realizing he hadn't known the importance of this place until now. He stood up, still in a daze, and saw the stone he had been sleeping on. It seemed like a simple stone, but now it felt so much more. He took it and stood it up as a pillar. Then, he poured oil on it, a special, sacred act to honor the moment. Jacob called the place Bethel, meaning house of God, because he now knew it was a holy place. But there was something else. Jacob wasn't just going to remember this moment. He made a vow. If God will be with me, if he will take care of me on this journey and bring me back home safely, then the Lord will be my God, and I will give him a tenth of everything I have. This moment wasn't just about dreams or promises. It was about a deep, life-changing commitment. Jacob had found something greater than his fears and doubts. It was the start of his new path, and everything he had thought he knew about life was turned upside down. The excitement and anticipation of what was to come was almost too much to handle. Would God really keep his promise? Would Jacob's life ever be the same again? The future was filled with mystery, but Jacob's heart burned with a new hope, one that would stay with him for the rest of his life. And so, that night, as Jacob set out once again, he knew that he was no longer alone. The God of heaven and earth was with him, and his journey, which had started with nothing but fear and shame, was now filled with purpose and hope. Jacob was on the road for a long time, running from his brother Esau, who wanted to hurt him. After traveling for days, he finally reached the land of the eastern people, Haran. He was exhausted, but something caught his eye: a well surrounded by sheep. Jacob was thirsty, but there was something even more interesting going on. He walked up to some shepherds who were sitting near the well. "Hey, where are you guys from?" he asked. "We're from Haran," they answered. Jacob's heart raced. This was the land of his family. "Do you know Laban, the son of Now?" he asked. "Yes, we know him," they replied. Jacob's heart skipped a beat. "Is he okay?" he asked, desperate to hear some good news. "Yes, he's well," they said. "And here comes his daughter, Rachel, with the sheep." Jacob's eyes widened. Rachel? That was his cousin, the daughter of his uncle Laban. His heart began to race with excitement and anticipation. Then something amazing happened. While they were still talking, Rachel appeared, leading her father's sheep to the well. Jacob didn't wait a second. He rushed to the well, grabbed the massive stone that covered it, and rolled it away with all his strength. He watered the sheep, then did something totally surprising. He kissed Rachel, and just like that, tears filled his eyes. He was so overwhelmed with emotion, a mix of happiness and excitement. He had finally found family, and someone so beautiful. "I'm your relative," he told Rachel, wiping his eyes. Rachel quickly ran to tell her father the news. When Laban heard that his sister's son, Jacob, had arrived, he couldn't believe it. He hurried to meet Jacob, and when they saw each other, Laban wrapped his arms around him in a big hug. He kissed Jacob and welcomed him into his home. Jacob stayed with Laban for a month, but soon, Laban turned to him and said, "You're my relative, but you shouldn't work for me for nothing. Tell me, what do you want for wages?" Jacob's heart raced again. This was his chance. "I will work 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel," he said, not even thinking twice. Laban agreed, saying, "It's better I give her to you than some stranger." So Jacob worked hard for 7 years, and the time seemed to fly by because he was so in love with Rachel. Every day, his heart was full of hope and excitement. But when the 7 years were up and Jacob was ready to marry Rachel, something horrible happened. Laban tricked him. At the wedding, Laban secretly switched Rachel with her older sister Leah. When Jacob woke up the next morning, he was horrified to find that he had married Leah, not Rachel. He was angry, upset, and completely shocked. "What have you done to me?" Jacob shouted at Laban. "I worked 7 years for Rachel, and you've given me Leah." His stomach was in knots with rage. How could Laban do this to him? Laban calmly explained, "In our land, we don't marry off the younger daughter before the older one. Finish the week with Leah, and then I'll give you Rachel too, in exchange for another 7 years of work." Jacob was disgusted, but what could he do? He agreed to stay with Leah for the week, and then Laban gave him Rachel, his true love, but it would cost him another 7 years of hard work. Even though Jacob now had both wives, his heart was torn. He loved Rachel more than Leah, and that made everything much harder for Leah. She was sad and hurt, feeling unloved. But when God saw how Leah was suffering, he decided to bless her. Leah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Reuben, saying, "Maybe now my husband will love me." But that didn't happen. Leah's sadness grew, but she didn't give up. She had more children. Her second son, Simeon, she named because she said, "God has heard me, and he gave me this son because I am not loved." Then another son, Levi, and she said, "Now maybe my husband will be attached to me." Finally, Leah had a fourth son and named him Judah. "This time, I will praise the Lord," she said. But after Judah, she stopped having children. Through all the sadness and disappointment, Leah had a reason to keep going. God had shown her love in his own way, even when Jacob didn't. Rachel had it all. She was beautiful, she had Jacob's love, and she had everything she could ever want except one thing: children. Every time she looked at her sister Leah, who had already given Jacob so many sons, jealousy burned in Rachel's heart. She was desperate. One day, Rachel couldn't take it anymore. She rushed to Jacob, her voice filled with pain. "Give me children or I'll die." Her eyes were wide with frustration and sadness. She wanted to be a mother more than anything. Jacob's face turned red with anger. "Am I in the place of God?" he snapped. "It's not my fault you can't have children." He felt overwhelmed by her demands, and he didn't know how to fix it. But Rachel wasn't giving up. She was desperate. "Okay then," she said, "take my servant Bilhah, have a child with her, and I'll raise it as my own." Jacob didn't hesitate. He agreed to have Bilhah as his wife, and soon she was pregnant with Jacob's child. When the baby boy was born, Rachel was overjoyed. "God has heard me," she said. "He's given me a son." She named him Dan, meaning vindicated. But Rachel wasn't finished. Soon, Bilhah gave birth to another son. Rachel was ecstatic, but her words were sharp. "I've won this battle with my sister." She named him Naphtali, meaning my struggle. Leah watched all of this from the sidelines. She had already given Jacob 4 sons, but now she stopped having children. She was afraid Rachel would win the race. So Leah did something bold. She gave her own servant, Zilpah, to Jacob as a wife. Zilpah quickly became pregnant, and when she had a son, Leah said, "What good fortune." She named him Gad. Not to be outdone, Zilpah had another son, and Leah cried out, "How happy I am! The women will call me happy." She named him Asher. The competition was fierce, and anger, jealousy, and bitterness filled the air. The two sisters were locked in a never-ending battle. One day, while walking in the fields, Leah's son Reuben found some mandrake plants, which were believed to help with fertility. When Rachel saw them, she was desperate. "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes," she begged Leah. Leah's face twisted with resentment. "Wasn't it enough that you took my husband? Now you want my son's mandrakes too." Rachel made a deal. "Fine, you can have Jacob for the night if you give me the mandrakes." So that night, Leah went to Jacob and said, "You must sleep with me tonight. I've bought you with my son's mandrakes." Jacob was shocked. This was not what he expected, but he went along with it, and that night, Leah became pregnant again. She had another son and named him Issachar, saying, "God has rewarded me for giving my servant to my husband." Leah wasn't done yet. She had another son and named him Zebulun, saying, "Now my husband will honor me because I've given him 6 sons." Finally, Leah had a daughter named Dinah. But the competition for Jacob's love and attention wasn't over. But God hadn't forgotten Rachel. After all the fighting, jealousy, and disappointment, Rachel became pregnant and gave birth to a son. Tears of joy filled her eyes. "God has taken away my disgrace," she said, naming him Joseph. "May the Lord add to me another son," she prayed, hoping this was just the beginning. After Rachel gave birth to Joseph, Jacob's life took another turn. He was ready to leave Laban's house and return to his own home. "I've worked hard for you," Jacob said to Laban. "Give me my wives and children, and I'll go." But Laban didn't want to let him go. "I've learned that the Lord has blessed me because of you," Laban said. "Stay, and I'll pay you whatever you want." Jacob thought about it for a moment. "Don't give me anything," he said. "Just let me take all the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored animals from your flocks. That will be my wages. If any of them are not spotted or speckled, they'll be considered stolen." Laban agreed, but that day, he took all the speckled and spotted animals and sent them far away, hoping to cheat Jacob. But Jacob wasn't worried. He had a plan. Jacob took branches from trees and peeled the bark off, exposing the white wood. He placed these branches in front of the watering troughs where the animals came to drink. When the animals mated, they would see the branches and give birth to speckled or spotted babies, just like Jacob wanted. Over time, Jacob's flocks grew stronger and larger. Meanwhile, Laban's animals became weaker. Jacob's clever plan worked, and he grew more prosperous every day. His hard work paid off, and he became richer than Laban ever expected. Jacob had worked for Laban for 20 long years, and in that time, he had built a life, married to Laban's daughters, Leah and Rachel, and blessed with many children. But something was wrong. Laban's sons started gossiping behind Jacob's back, saying, "Jacob has taken everything our father owns. He's stolen all the wealth that should have been ours." Jacob's heart sank. He could feel the tension building. Laban no longer treated him like family. There was a coldness in the way Laban looked at him, and Jacob knew something was coming. Then one night, God spoke to Jacob in a dream. "Go back to the land of your fathers, and I will be with you." Jacob knew it was time to leave. Fear gripped him. He had worked so hard for everything he had, but now it was time to go. Jacob called his wives, Rachel and Leah, to the fields where his flocks were. "Your father's attitude has changed," Jacob said. "I've worked hard for him, but he's cheated me over and over. God has been with me, though, and he has blessed me." Jacob told them about a dream he had, where God showed him how the animals he had worked with were streaked, speckled, and spotted, just like the flocks God promised would be his. God had seen what Laban had done and was now giving Jacob all the blessings. Leah and Rachel were shocked by the news, but agreed with Jacob. "Does our father still treat us like daughters?" Rachel said, "He's treated us like strangers, and everything that God has taken from him belongs to us and our children. Do what God has told you." With that, Jacob packed up his children and his wives, gathered all his animals, and set off toward Canaan. But there was one thing Rachel couldn't resist. She secretly stole her father's household gods, idols that were supposed to bring blessings and protection. Jacob didn't tell Laban he was leaving. He couldn't. Laban would never let him go. So Jacob fled, crossing the Euphrates River, heading to the hills of Gilead, full of anticipation about starting a new life, but also scared of what Laban might do when he found out. 3 days later, Laban found out that Jacob had run away. Rage boiled inside him. He gathered his relatives and set off to chase down Jacob. For 7 days, Laban and his men searched for him, and finally, they caught up in the hills of Gilead. Laban confronted Jacob, furious. "What have you done?" he yelled. "You've stolen my daughters and my grandchildren like captives in war. Why didn't you say goodbye? You didn't even let me kiss my family goodbye. You've done a foolish thing." But then Laban paused. "I have the power to hurt you," he threatened. "But last night, God spoke to me and told me not to harm you. And why did you steal my gods?" Jacob, nervous but determined, replied, "I was afraid you would take my wives and children away from me by force." He looked Laban right in the eye and said, "If you find your gods among us, that person will die." Laban searched through Jacob's camp, going from tent to tent. He checked Leah's tent. Nothing. He checked the servants' tents. Still nothing. But when he reached Rachel's tent, she was sitting on her camel saddle. The tension was unbearable. Laban searched everywhere, but Rachel had hidden the idols under her saddle and was sitting on them. "Don't be angry, father," Rachel said sweetly. "I can't stand up because of my period." Laban didn't think twice and left without a clue. Jacob, now angry and frustrated, turned to Laban and demanded, "What is my crime? What have I done to deserve being chased down like this?" Jacob continued, "I've worked for you for 20 years. Your sheep and goats have always been healthy. I've never taken what wasn't mine, and I've lost sleep over your flocks. And for all of this, you've changed my wages 10 times. He stared at Laban and said, "If it weren't for the God of my father, the God of Abraham and the fear of Isaac, you would have sent me away empty-handed. But God saw my hard work and rebuked you last night." Laban, realizing there was no way to win this fight, gritted his teeth. "The women are my daughters. The children are my children. Everything you see here is mine. But what can I do? I can't change anything now. Let's make a covenant." So Jacob and Laban took stones and made a pile of rocks to mark their agreement. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, and Jacob called it Galeed, both names meaning witness. They made a promise. No one would cross the pile of rocks to harm the other. Laban warned Jacob, "If you mistreat my daughters or take another wife, God will be the witness between us." They called on God to watch over them and keep them safe from each other. Jacob swore an oath, and they offered a sacrifice right there on the hill. After eating and making peace, they spent the night. But the next morning, Laban kissed his daughters and grandchildren one last time. With a heavy heart, he turned and went back home. Jacob's journey was full of surprise and danger, but it ended in peace. Trusting God and standing up for what was right saved Jacob from Laban's anger. As Jacob left, he knew that no matter how many challenges he faced, God was with him. And that was all that mattered. Jacob wrestles with God and gets a new name, Israel. Up next on the next part of Genesis.